So good afternoon. Today I'm going to do an introduction to the topic of traditional African religion. My name is Colleen Haas, and I teach at Indiana State University in the curriculum of African and African American Studies in the History Department. So we're going to get started here. I'll pull up PowerPoint to help us today. And I want you to know that in using the word traditional, what I'm referring to is really a diverse set of spiritual worldviews. Sometimes it's referred to as indigenous religions, but these religions have shaped communities across the African continent for centuries. Though there are distinct differences in belief and practices, there are some general commonalities that I will present as an introduction to this topic. Some things many of these religions have in common are a recognition of the sacredness in nature, and a belief in set of methods for honoring one's ancestors. There's this view that life is really a connection to the life on earth and then the life of the spiritual realms, and there's less attention to the afterlife. So learning about religion in an educational setting is possible, but it's delicate as we deal with some of these realities in our midst. As instructors and as students, we might belong or affiliate ourselves with a particular set of religious beliefs. Or some of us may not be particularly religious or have any devotional practices. Either way, this is fine. I do not ask that you agree with or adopt these religious principles and expressions. And in all humility, I was not raised with these beliefs, but have learned about them in my studies and my research and through my conversations amongst friends. All I ask is that you suspend judgment and try to understand that for many people, these tenets and practices are authentic to them and they are held dear in their hearts. So as I begin, I invite you to approach these traditions with curiosity, respect, acknowledging their depth as well as their resilience and continued influence in many communities across the continent and in the African diaspora. So overall, traditional African religions are their diversity is shaped by their ethnic or social groupings as well. We see reflections of in some of the structures of religion based on power structures within their own societies. Their variations are present. There's many diverse directions that traditional religion can go. They aren't necessarily based in a single holy book. And there isn't a framework of institutional consistency, although there are some things that you will see kind of relate or intersect amongst these religions. There's always a foundational logic behind the belief, and there's a historical story to those beliefs. So I want to go over some basic vocabulary. One is there is this notion that some religions are inclusive or pluralistic. And what this means is that they have a tolerance for different religious views. There might be an acceptance or even an integration of other religious views throughout historical time. Exclusive religions are a little bit different, where they tend to be focused on the beliefs and practices and also asserting a difference and a kind of a individuality or an insular identity to those religions. Many of these traditional African religions are not exclusive. They're more permeable where other influences come in to the fray. Indigenous religion is another way to refer to it. And another term that I'll be using at times will be devotees or adherents. This means people who participate in this religion. Now, one of the commonalities amongst traditional religion is that there is a belief in a supreme God of some form. They have different names in the different religions, But there is an acknowledgement that there is a supreme deity or a supreme God that is the origin of all life on the planet. And this supreme God is concerned with human welfare and that people get along, and that there is also a protection of some form of moral guidelines of how to be a person in the world, how to be a good person. So in African traditional religions, what's considered sacred? Well, everything. There is an attention, especially to what we refer to as elemental forces. And these are things that are represented in nature, energies or processes that go on in the natural world. And this kind of religious framework, it falls under the definition of animist beliefs. Animist also covers traditional religions in Asia and other parts of the world. Animist beliefs and practices are centered in looking at anything in nature, like a rock or a body of water or a tree, is emanating some kind of spiritual energy and therefore is deserving of attention and respect. A lot of times people will highlight these energies or even take seriously their interactions with these energies. This is a foundational framework for this belief. And this, interestingly enough, was often a point of contention between foreigners as they came onto the continent throughout time. And of course, Christianity and Islam are the two religions that also exist on the continent of Africa. But this kind of animist belief is one of the areas of tension between these religions. A key feature in this traditional worldview is a belief that humans really can't control nature, though, even though there's a reverence for it. So there are a lot of practices in terms of acknowledging spirits in nature. And you can see here in this image, there's a sculpture that's been made to acknowledge some of those spiritual forces. And people also take time to either greet or give offerings to various places in nature to help them communicate with the spirits of these elemental forces. Excuse me. People with this traditional belief mindset don't want to change nature so much or interfere with its processes, but instead they're more focused on human behavior or how to get humans to align with spiritual principles. And so the urge is not to change nature, but to change themselves to accommodate things that they learn about from nature. There's also this belief, it's an early belief, that events could happen depending on the actions of people. And this also can refer to natural disasters or bad things happening to people, like someone drowning or someone dying. There has been times in history where they believe those events happen because of something that somebody did in the community to harm that community or harm an individual in that community, like stealing something or lying or doing something that causes great harm to the community. The role of the community and family are very important. And a lot of ceremonies and rituals are really intended to foster or to maintain harmony within the community, to solve conflicts, to offer a structured way to interact with each other and intergenerationally as well. Rituals are designed to strengthen those social bonds. In this traditional religious framework, elders hold the authority both in leading rituals, making decisions according to spiritual ideals, and also teaching the young. One thing that's very unique about traditional religions and animist beliefs all over the world is that there is an acknowledgement of the spirit world. And when I speak of the spirit world, I don't mean it in a negative way or a scary way. It's actually a realm in which people want to make connections with, and they believe that it brings good things to their lives. There is this practice of utilizing multiple spiritual beings for communication, either with spiritual principles or with ancestors or with the supreme God. This is grounded in a belief that one can't reach or communicate directly with the supreme God because that supreme God is too powerful or is not accessible through an individual intercession. And so the belief is that we need these spiritual beings to serve as a messenger. So sometimes they're referred to as intermediary gods or messenger gods. So this image here is an artistic rendering coming from the Yoruba tradition in Nigeria. And these different gods are depicted here in this drawing. They are referred to as orishas. They represent various attributes of the supreme God. So in a way, they are different elements of a spiritual principles, such as justice or nurturing or the beauty of life and the culture. So these different gods are actually quite developed, kind of like Greek mythology. They have names, they have special music for each one. They are there are special places in nature that are designated to pray to these gods or to communicate with these gods. But they are seen as real forces and influences in their lives, and they help people with their lives. People will seek them out during a ritual. Usually it's a collective, community-based ritual. As you can see here, I have different examples, sometimes to resolve some difficulties they're having with either their spouse or someone in the community. They believe they can help bring good into the world. They can help with having a child. Lots of aspects of everyday life. These gods are sought to assist in those day-to-day things as well as large events in a person's life. Spirits of ancestors, people who have passed on, a beloved community member or a family member, are also very important in traditional religions. A person who passes away is not the belief that that person goes away and they're never again part of your life. They The belief rather is that they take on a new kind of presence. They're still part of the community, but they have a different status. And so they have the status of an ancestor, and an ancestor is a kind of a very wise and protective spirit that can hover close and can be contacted when needed. They they are an active role in the community, they just have a different status. Their memory is kept alive through ritual and other ritual actions. Sometimes before people begin their day, they may offer a salutation to their ancestor or a greeting, and then they will offer that greeting to their gods that they're interested in looking over them. So these spiritual beings, both the ancestors and the messenger gods, are invested with special powers. And like I had said earlier, they have different personalities and they have attributes, meaning they have aspects of their personality that is strong and helpful, and they can help you solve problems. Here's a quote from a scholar, Toyoin Falolia, and he says, "Humans must negotiate with them to have a meaningful life." So there is a belief in the religion that which he comes from, the Yoruba people, where if you don't actively seek out a relationship with your ancestors after they have passed, or one or two of these gods, then you're going to have problems in your life. You're going to have difficulties. And sometimes when people do have difficulties, it can be a medical problem or it could be a psychological problem. Sometimes the traditional healers or the traditional priests will recommend that if they haven't done some of these proper practices of reaching out to these entities, that they should do so because to them it's an indication their challenges and their problems are an indication that they have not taken care of these relationships. So a person that you would go to or that would give these recommendations are these specialists, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit later. But there are all kinds of leadership roles in these traditional religions, and some of them are priests, diviners, or shamans, and we'll talk about them in a little bit here. So, what are the places and methods for traditional religious practices? Well, there are many. So, we'll begin with talking about the physical spaces or the physical objects that help support this religious view. There are shrines and sacred groves, and sacred groves would mean like a forested area that is considered infused with sacred energies. And that has been the case because either it is rich in natural resources, has a lot of aspects or characteristics that feel sacred to people, and then they will designate those places as a sacred place. They may also enhance that place with objects, either artwork or tying things to trees or creating some kind of practice that will in their mind turn up the heat or intensify the energy so they're when you go into these places it is easier to access or it's just reserved for those kinds of spiritual activities. These places are not to be invaded with other kinds of activities. They're considered special and sacred, and so you don't generally go in there with other reasons like um, just hanging out or playing pranks on people, or it's considered taboo to do those kinds of things. And so they're designated as special. Most shrines are in natural sites, but you can also create shrines or altars in your home. And so sometimes people will have a room where they have created something that might look like this picture down here of this kind of a tiered altar with different objects that get put on there. Sometimes food is put there as an offering to the gods. And these are very interactive altars. They don't stay the same. You change it out, you clean it up, you refresh them. But the idea is that it's helping you communicate with these deities, spirits, or ancestors. A lot of rituals are will take place in these sacred places or even natural places. Sometimes rituals begin with a very that's, how can I put it, a very serious tone or very with a lot of intention, and then they can evolve into a festival, depending on the kind of time of year that some of these deities get acknowledged, or some of these, sometimes it's tied to the agricultural cycle of planting or harvesting food. These pictures here are an example that are held every year in Oshogbo, Nigeria. And this is a sacred Yoruba festival. The Yoruba people is an ethnic group there. And they celebrate the river Oshun. And then they also attribute the goddess Oshun to this part of their, in the Oshogbo area. It's very involved rituals and festivals. There's lots of processions and numerous steps that they do every year. There's a lot of music, dancing, and then they will also take up the water and bless each other. And often the priestesses in this tradition are female, which in some traditional religions, the priests are male. Drumming and dancing for religious and spiritual rites is very common in traditional African religious practice. The drumming is a repetitive type of music, and a lot of times drum patterns are matched to specific gods. So every god will have their signature rhythm, and sometimes only that rhythm is played for that god. And when people hear those rhythms, they can connect that rhythm to the identity of a particular god. They're quite versed in this. Same with dance steps. So all of this is very prearranged. The dancing is choreographed. It is not spontaneous. And the dances are very narrative like they often tell the stories of these different gods. Other types of music that will happen during rituals could be chanting or singing, or even just an oral recitation, out loud reading of some sacred stories or some poetry that's connected to one of the gods. These are used to pray. So here's an image of a woman who has a bell in her hand, and as she shakes it back and forth and can even strike it with another stick, it helps her in her prayer. And the opening prayers are usually a call or an invocation. And the belief is that when you sing this prayer, and you are inviting the God to be present. So it isn't just a song that praises the God, although a lot of the words are bragging about that God, or pointing to the attributes of that God. The process of singing it out loud is, the belief is that you are invoking the presence of those gods right then and there. And sometimes then a priestess will also chant over other people, as we can see in this bottom picture here, when you're offering blessings or you're carrying out a particular ritual. Another form of religious practice that is quite unique to traditional African religions is the practice of masking. They're referred to as masquerades. These images I have here are three different types of ethnic groups, but masks are often used for religious rites, especially for the agricultural cycle, like planting. There's particular masks that come out for the planting of different crops. The most common places we see masking for sacred purposes are with youth initiation rites and funerals. So the image here of the person who's got a kind of a circular mask over his face, this is an initiation mask, actually for young men. The image in the middle is a funeral rite of the Senufo people, and it's a little bit hard to see the masks on the head, but the thought is that the elders and the ancestors help with the deceased to move into the next phase of their existence. And so the belief is that they need these spiritual beings that are, they're actually people who are disguised through these masks to communicate this process of helping the dead usher them into the next phase of their existence. These masks here that have the strong black and white geometric patterns on them are very interesting. This is of the Bois people, and they are individually made according to the qualities of their ancestors. So these masks are actually dedicated to individuals in the family life or the life of the compound. So in terms of leadership or various roles that people have, we'll start with the priest or the priestesses. And their role is to lead any kind of religious rite and festival, or even to mediate over people's conflicts or to give guidance to folks. There is a unique role that we could refer to as a medium. They're like a spirit medium, and their job is to serve the community. And so they do that through the belief is that they are actually able to undergo a trance-like state in which they are possessed by one of these intermediary gods. And their ability to do that is highly valued because the community gets to interact with those gods if a person can embody them. And so the idea is that they undergo a trance, and usually these people are trained. They aren't just doing it randomly. They're cultivated through sometimes a 7-year process of learning how to do this. And the music is played in a certain way that calls and invokes that god. The priestess will chant, or the priest will chant and call the god into midst. And then the belief is that the person can then, that God can occupy that person, where their personality goes away temporarily, or they undergo a trance, and then they start to move and talk in and connect with people, and it's really perceived no longer as that person, but the God is present in this ritual, that the God is actually there. It's a highly valued role. It's a very specialized role, the spirit mediums. There is also an individual that you can go to for an individual consult, kind of like somebody who, it's a little bit like a combination like a therapist or a fortune teller, but it's got a long history and quite a sophisticated amount of uh, resources that this person uses to do their job. These are referred to as diviners. And this is an example, again, from the Yoruba people, where you have a person who specializes in the art of divination, which is to deliver some kind of sacred message. And usually the message is very poetic. And so it's open-ended, it's not super literal. And in this way, the person can derive meaning from it. And the process is, in this case, you can see that there's this tray on the ground and it has a substance in it. Sometimes it's cornmeal or flour. And so they spread this kind of powdery like mixture on the tray. And then they take cowrie shells and they put them in their hands and shake them as the person asks the question. And the shaman or the diviner will go to a state of channeling some kind of spiritual message to this person. They drop the shells on the tray, and the shells, either if they're up with the crease on top or over, they create a configuration and a design. And every design corresponds to a certain verse in a sacred, it's a body of many verses, like a sacred, it's kind of like a Bible, but it isn't written down. It's an oral tradition. And so then the priest, and in this case, the Babalawo, will explain to the person what that configuration is telling them. And this whole practice, or this collective body of sacred texts or sacred verses, is called Ifa. There are other types of groups. There are secret societies that are also involved with spiritual work. Sometimes they form to kind of develop and to keep the tradition alive, and often are the ones that will teach the young people when they are ready. And some of these spiritual lessons or spiritual practices are considered to be important enough to be withheld from the young until they're ready to handle some of these practices. And so the secret societies are the people who take care of that information, keep it alive throughout the generations, and teach it to the young. Sometimes they're organized themselves along where they live, or sometimes it's organized based on occupations. They might even be involved with keeping social order within the community. They're highly respected, but they call them secret societies because a lot of the information is not um, passed on to everyone until they're ready to be inaugurated or initiated into the religion. There are also sisterhoods, but sometimes they're connected to occupations that they consider highly spiritual occupations like hunting or carving wood. And this is naturally, we can see the connection here of there's a respect for the natural world and an understanding that spirit lives everywhere in the natural world. And therefore, if you're going to take the life of an animal or a tree, you need to be able to manage those energies and to create an offering to the gods and also to express proper gratitude in receiving the gifts of those elements in nature. There is another religious role. It's rare, and especially more rare today, but these are referred to as witches or sorcerers. And these people will specialize in a type of sorcery that usually, again, is designed to help the community. It's usually to undo some kind of curse that people believe maybe somebody has placed upon either an individual or maybe a village area. And again, we have to remember that these are beliefs, and then people come up with a system and people who can assist with those challenges that they feel they could face in their community life. So overall, I want to just hit upon a few things here. A lot of these religions, these traditional religions, are pluralistic. They're not exclusive religions. And so what that means is that they can accept more than one truth, and they have a tolerance and a comfort with that. And therefore, there's a lot of integration of various religious beliefs. Sometimes they will even accommodate people who visit who have a different practice a different religion. They may even include a song from their religious community. They're very accommodating and they're very adaptive. So they're not rigid or static religious practices. They change throughout time, and especially with how to express some of these ideas continue, but there's a lot of changes in terms of how to express some of these beliefs. So throughout time, there have been some clashes, clearly, especially right before the colonial period and during the colonial period. There were many foreign missionaries during the late 1800s to early 1900s that came and believed that they had a role in bringing religion to African people. A lot of these missionaries were not from Africa, and they also had a sense that Africans really probably didn't have much of a religious viewpoint, or their practices were not very developed or very good for people. And so there was a sincere concern about people on the part of missionaries that they, learn a faith that can help them reach a better state and to possibly go to heaven when they die. This is a Christian belief. But traditional African religions, remember, they're not as concerned with the afterlife as they are with life in the here and now. So generally, colonial officials and missionaries, in essence, just didn't understand these religions and they didn't value them. They found many of the practices antithetical to things that they believed because they weren't able to communicate with Africans to understand why they did what they did. And usually when we don't understand religious behaviors, because we don't understand the beliefs that underpin them. So I would say in general, an assessment could be made that they gravely misunderstood the role of intermediary spirits and gods. We know about perhaps about the commandments that say, thou shalt not worship false gods. We need to remember that Africans weren't worshiping intermediary gods. They were seeing them as a way to access the supreme God. So this was the part that mostly troubled outsiders. I would say animist beliefs and the divination practices were the things that people noticed and had problems with and made many statements and many actions to condemn these religions, and in some cases to forbid them. So in conclusion, I would just like to say a few words here that African traditional religion reminds us of the deep connections between these people, their community, and the spiritual world. And it's my hope that we may carry forward a tolerance and a nuanced understanding of the various religious traditions all over the world. I think that by examining systems of belief like this that are coming from generations of people in Africa can offer insights into the other cultural traditions in Africa that many of us enjoy, like art, music, dance, poetry, storytelling, theater, and the visual arts. Thank you.